Extinction Rebellion is absolutely crucial. There is nothing like it, quite frankly, out there at the moment, and we need mass movement to make change happen. For me, my motivation to join XR and to be part of a movement to make change happen comes from my love of wildlife. It's so important. I think it's really important to be a voice for the voiceless. And unfortunately, it seems that the voices that we're shouting the loudest seem to be drowning out the voices that need to be heard the most. And ultimately, I think a lot of the time we forget that we are animals too. And when we start seeing mass extinction of wildlife like we're seeing right now, every 24 hours, we're seeing around 200 species of plant, mammal, bird and insect going extinct, disappearing forever. And for me, that is motivation to be here. That's motivation to turn up, because that is not okay. Scientists say that's roughly around 1,000 times faster than what is considered normal. And I listen to scientists, and I think we all should. They're the people that can tell us, as far as is possible, what the future is likely to look like if we ignore that. My area of expertise is talking to people. So for me, one of the challenges has been making that message heard on a one-to-one basis. So I'll speak to people at the protests and I'll make sure that they're aware of climate change. And sometimes you have the amazing experience where you speak to somebody who quite frankly had no idea that climate change is as extreme as it is. And those conversations will go amazingly usually, because they'll be shocked and they'll say, well, of course you're here. When can I come? Let me know. And I've spoken to people from America who are visiting just on trips to do some sightseeing, and they've shown up at protests the following day. That's the amazing bit. But the struggles is the people who unfortunately don't understand the extent of the climate crisis and therefore see what we're doing, trying to stand up on behalf of everybody and saying, you know, yes, we are aware that these problems are massive and that the consequences of making change happen does have an impact on all of us. We're not going to be able to live life the way that we were doing. And whilst that's inconvenient, we, all of us together, are saying we are prepared for that change. The bad side of that means that for some people who don't understand that those changes are necessary, they often can be quite aggressive or can be quite anti-Extinction Rebellion and see it as an us versus them. Extinction Rebellion is not an us versus them. It is not a divisive issue. It is an issue that should unite everyone. And that is where Extinction Rebellion is particularly poignant, because it does not put barriers up between the everyday person and scientists and the science. It says this is about everybody and everybody should be involved. And I think that's really what puts me wearing this badge. When you are engaged with the climate crisis and you're aware of what is going on, it can feel extremely isolating. A word that's coming up a lot recently is eco-anxiety. And eco-anxiety is a big deal. It can really feel drowning. It can feel pointless. It can feel like there's no point me as an individual making changes in my everyday life because it's not going to have an impact. But when you go to these protests, you meet the most fantastic people from all walks of life. Young people, older people, people of the same age group as you, in different departments, different backgrounds. It's fantastic to see that you are not alone. This is, again, something that is uniting us all. I am not arrestable. It's not because of where I'm at in my life, in my career. I don't feel like that's a possibility for me. And I think it's important to talk about the fact that that is self-declaring. You choose whether or not that is something you do. But going to these protests, you can see the people who are willing to do that. I myself went round and interviewed a few of them. I said, you know, why are you willing to do this? Tell me about it. And almost every single person that I spoke to used the human as a reason. They had family, children, they've got a future that they're investing in. And for me, that's really inspiring, especially when you consider that for me, my motivation comes from the wildlife. It's not so human-centered. I've got sisters, I've got a brother who is really potentially keen on having children. I've decided not to have children because of the climate crisis, but I'm still invested in their future. However, for me, you know, it's great to see other people. That's the thing that gets me motivated, is seeing everybody else's motivations too, beyond just my own. I'm 27 and I first started to love wildlife, really love wildlife, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and that's when I started working in conservation. So I was working as a journalist. I found that lots of people don't like you as a journalist. And I can kind of understand why sometimes, because you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, so sometimes often your reflection of reality can not be adequate compared to somebody who is in the know about things. And so I decided to start learning more about what I was passionate about and started working in conservation. And then I just loved it, and I thought that was everything. So for 4 years I went into that a bit more. I have my fair share of a carbon footprint, absolutely. I am a hypocrite in that way. I've definitely travelled to places like Canada. I've been there for 2 years, learnt some amazing things that I hope to bring back and apply to conservation here. And I'm really working on trying to decrease my impact now, in part because of Extinction Rebellion. There are people who are doing their own bit in their own home, and they think that that's enough. And most people will try and turn the lights off. Most people will try and travel less. Most people are trying to do their bit. And I think it's awful that that isn't enough at this stage. We know that there's around 100 companies producing around 71% of the global carbon emissions. So how on earth do we have a hope of changing things if we don't make things change at a high enough level? And I think that's a big disconnect between the individual who isn't involved in XR or perhaps doesn't know much about the climate crisis and those that are. This needs to be tackled as a collective, because as an individual, your impact can be huge. We've got examples of that with Greta Thunberg. We've got examples of that by all sorts of great Indigenous activists and people around the world. But ultimately, that is not enough. You can't have one individual leading a movement. It needs to be all of us collectively saying we want change, and we want change now, and we're willing to suffer the consequences if it means the future for the wildlife and for whatever motivation is backing your choice to be part of Extinction Rebellion.